Okay, now we're going to start breaking apart the different sections of a paper. And you're going to read or watch each one of these as I assign these different sections for you. I'm going to explain to you some relatively easy ways to write them up or what needs to be included, and then you'll do this in your own paper. Okay, I'm going to do this by showing you one of the papers that I've included on your example paper list. So this is a paper by Tani Crippen and Cynthia Sheffield. And some of these writers are just really, really good. I mean, Tani Crippen is a really great writer, and I really like how she organizes everything. So I'm going to show you this paper for these next several lessons. So let's start with this first major assignment. I'm having you do a title and an abstract. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about keywords and authorship in this particular thing. So starting with a title. Now, a title seems like the normal place to start, right? Really, a title is probably the last thing you're going to write, because a title has to encapsulate absolutely everything about your particular paper. So you want to know what your paper is about, what your conclusions are, where you're going with this, and who your audience is before you write that title. The basic aspects of a good title. Think about what a title does for the paper. Readers come across research paper titles when they're searching through databases, when they're searching through reference sections of research papers. A title has to allow a reader to deduce what a paper is about and the relevance to that reader based on just a few words. That's a lot to ask of, say, 5 to 10 words, right? Your title is probably, therefore, your most important determinant of how many people are going to read your paper. So if you think about it that way, that's going to change how you're going to come up with your title. So a good title is going to condense the paper's content into just a few words. And when I say a few words, I mean it. There's actually a paper, I might link to it on eCampus for you. A paper just recently came out that said a shorter title is going to get more reads and you get cited more than a longer title. So while long titles may sound super scientific-y, so to speak, a shorter title is going to get more people reading it, and that's what you want. So you want to condense that paper's content into a few words. A good title will capture the reader's attention in some way. This is why sometimes you see titles with puns in them or with things that make you laugh a little bit, trying to capture that readership. That title is going to differentiate the paper from other papers of the same subject area, and it's going to highlight key words that can be used as a search term on Google or in a library database. So let's look at this paper that we're going to look at for the next few lessons. The title of this paper is External Surface Disinfection of the Lesser Mealworm, Coleoptera tenebrionidae. That's pretty straightforward, right? We know exactly what is happening in this particular paper. They tried to disinfect or sterilize the external surface of the lesser mealworm. And then they put in that it is Coleoptera, we know it's a beetle, tenebrionidae, now we know which family it is. Quick aside, whenever you write a scientific name of an insect or a common name of an insect, immediately after the first time you write this name, you have to put in parentheses, open parentheses, then the order of that species or common name, colon, and then the family. This way, if somebody doesn't know what a lesser mealworm is, I mean, if you didn't really have pets or whatever, you have no idea what a lesser mealworm is, but you did know a little bit about entomology, you could go there and say, oh, it's a beetle. Oh, it's in that family. Cool. Okay? So there's a lot of species out there. We don't know all of them. You want to know, is it Hymenoptera? Is it Coleoptera? Is it Lepidoptera? What is it? Okay, so every time you have to write that. But notice how short this title is. So back to the title. Notice how short it is. It's straightforward. If you were to do a search, let's say you wanted to know how to disinfect the surface, this would come up first hit on Google. This comes up first hit on the library database. So it's great for that sort of thing. So when you think about your own title, you want to start thinking about your paper. Okay, so you think about your paper and then start summarizing the main themes of your paper in just a few sentences. Okay, it's sort of that ideal, you know when your mom or your grandma or somebody asks you, hey, what are you researching? What are you doing in school? You can't go into this long diatribe of what you're researching and what you're doing in school. That's insane. Instead, you give them a little 1 or 2 sentence overview, right? I'm looking at maggots on dead guys. That's what I tell my parents all the time. Neat. Okay? Pretty straightforward. That's a great summary of what you're doing with maybe a little bit more detail, a little bit more scientific. So you start out with that summary. Then you're going to choose the most important words of that summary. And those important words are your keywords. They're the ones that people will be thinking about when you talk to them about your paper. Okay? Then you're going to rearrange those important words from your summary until they're in the proper order to form a sentence. Then you're going to read through this a few times, you're going to massage it a little bit, add a few things, and you'll have your title. Okay? While you're doing this, keep a couple of tips in mind. 1, you're going to keep it simple, brief, and attractive. Okay? The primary function of that title is to provide a precise summary of the paper's content, so you want to keep it brief and clear. Use active verbs when you can. You don't want these complex noun-based phrases, and you want to avoid unnecessary details. You don't want to run on forever and ever with all these details. So a good title is typically around 10 to 12 words long. That seems to be the average. Fewer is better. So this is apart from the mandatory information such as the order and family of the insect. Anything that goes longer than about 12 words can seem really, really unfocused. Then you want to think about using appropriate descriptive words. A good title needs to contain keywords that are used in the manuscript, and they should define the nature of that study. So think about terms people would search for on Google or in the library where you want your study to come up. You include those in the title. So again, back to this particular title. It's short. Hey, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words here, right? Did I count that right? Whatever. 7 words here. It tells you exactly what you're doing. We've got keywords: disinfection, lesser mealworm, external surface, done. There's nothing excess in there. Okay. You're going to avoid abbreviations in your title. You're also going to avoid jargon. So things that are well known, things like HIV or E. coli, you can write those in the title. That's fine. But other lesser known or more specific abbreviations should be left out. Leave that for your introduction. Then you can define it. You're going to take some time to review your title. You're going to refine it as you go along. Okay, so do this over and over and over again. And then once you have written your title, read it again or put it away for about a day. Then come back and read it again and ask yourself 2 questions. 1, does this title, seen in isolation without having to read anything else, give a full yet concise and specific indication of the paper? So this title, for example, you read it, you know what this paper is going to be about, right? They could have done this a myriad of different ways. They could have said sterilization of bacteria on particular beetle larvae that are important for chicken feed. And that goes on forever. You don't really know what they're doing. It's awful, okay? So you want to know that this gives a concise and specific indication of the paper. If you read this, or would someone interested in the exact topic of your paper, would they read this title and be inclined to read your abstract? So if I was interested in the exact process of surface sterilization of the lesser mealworm, I read this, yeah, I'm reading the abstract. Heck yeah, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, so ask yourself that question. Okay? Those 2 things you want to keep in mind. Your peers in the field should be able to immediately recognize every single word in the title. If your peers need something defined in the title, take it out. Do not use it. Your title should then convey the essence of your work to your peers very easily. So think of your title as a 1-sentence summary of your entire paper. This is the thing that you're going to tell your friends, your family, everything when they ask you, what are you studying? So if I were to be studying this external disinfection and my mom asked me, what are you studying nowadays? I'll say, I'm looking at the external disinfection of the lesser mealworm. It's a beetle. Pretty straightforward, right? 2 seconds, she knows exactly what I'm talking about. That's an excellent title. Okay, so that's how you do your title. Up next is authorship. Authorship's an interesting point, an interesting portion. Authorship has to do with who put work into this particular research. And by work, I don't only mean who wrote this paper. I also mean who gathered the data, who was involved in any way. In some cases, it's going to be who ran the lab where this data was collected. All of that needs to be in authorship. When people decide who is going to be an author on the paper, this is usually a bit of a negotiation. Okay? There are two places that you can put or you can list people who helped out on the paper. You can put them as authorship, which is a much higher level. Okay, this is a lot of great accolades you get from authoring papers. It's great on your CV, all that sort of stuff. You can also put them in the acknowledgments. Now, the acknowledgments, this is more for somebody really helped you out. Maybe you borrowed some of their equipment, but they didn't do any actual work. Or they drove you to Starbucks one day or something. Okay, or maybe you have to acknowledge some of your funding resources. That's what acknowledgments are for. It's a really sort of low level, hey, by the way, thanks for helping. It's basically like saying thanks to somebody. Okay? Authorship, that is for people who did the work. So anybody who gathered any data, anybody who wrote up this paper, anybody who did any work at all on this paper, they get authorship. If you leave somebody out of authorship and they did a lot of work on the paper, that's a huge scientific slight. And there's a lot of broken friendships and stuff when that happens. So if somebody hands over data to you and says, hey, add this to your paper, they get some authorship. Now, the order in which you list the authors, this is also very important. The first author that you see is usually the person who did the most work, who has the most invested in this paper, all of that sort of stuff. And they're the ones who are going to actually be cited. If you think about the way that you cite things in text, especially when you think about, say, in stars, the way we're doing it, we do the last name and the year of the paper. You're using the last name of this, the first author. So the first author is the highest place to be. You want to be first author on as many papers as you possibly can. Last author, this is usually reserved for, say, people whose lab you worked in. If they allowed you to do the work and made it possible for you to do your work, they get last authorship. So when you look at a big long list of authors, the first author is probably the one who did all of the work. The last author is probably the one who owned the lab. You see this a lot in people who research at universities. So look at anybody, any graduate student or some junior faculty, say, who have published recently. You'll see like 12 people on these in this authorship. That's because everybody has to be involved. It's a big slight if you're not. The first author is the person who did all the work. The last author is usually the professor. So in my research papers that I wrote from my grad school, when I went to A&M here, my professor was Dr. Jeff Tomberlin. So in all the authorship, you'll see Adrian Brundage first, Tomberlin last. He didn't do any of the work, but I was in his lab using his money with his equipment, and he was the one who got me here. So he gets authorship. People in the middle, they're the ones who have helped out. Okay, so if anybody comes in and assists you, if they give you your data, whatever else, you can put them somewhere in the middle. Now, on this particular paper, we have just two authors, and I happen to know that these two authors have the same level of ownership of the labs, but you see that T. Crippen is first. She did all the work, or most of the work in this. Cynthia Sheffield helped. So she got second authorship in this case. So when you write down your authors on your paper, keep that in mind. You want whoever is doing the bulk of the work to go first, and then if there's a professor or somebody involved, they go last. All right, so that's authorship. Up next, let's talk about the keywords. In some journals, they require that you have a list of keywords. The keywords are usually put right underneath the abstract, like you see them here. And this, again, is like what you would use in Google to do a Google search for something, just basic keywords. These tend to be put in simply because it makes it easier for databases to find your paper. So you want to go through your paper and think about what would people be searching for above and beyond what I was able to fit into my title. What would they be searching for in order to pull up my paper? Okay, so in this case, you know, you got your external surface disinfection of the lesser mealworm, pretty clear, but they added some extra keywords. They repeated that lesser mealworm thing. They repeated external disinfection, but here they were also able to put in the genus and species of this particular insect. It wasn't nearly as clear when they had this lesser mealworm genus and species in the title, so they left it for the keywords. Then they put in bacteria and poultry litter and beetle. All those sort of excess words that they pulled out, when they did those simple summaries of their paper, pulled out those keywords, the ones they couldn't fit in the title, put in the keywords. So when you're writing your title, feel free to take out any excess words because you have room in the keywords. Okay, the final thing that we're looking at is the abstract. An abstract is a synopsis of your paper. If you think about it, all the papers that you've read, you usually read the title and go, that's interesting. Then you pull up the abstract. The abstract is going to give you an overview of what's going on in that paper. Think about it as if, you told, say, someone like, I'm studying the external surface disinfection of mealworms. And then they get super interested. They go, really? What's that about? But you don't have a year and a half to explain everything. Instead, maybe you've got 3 or 4 minutes to really explain what you're doing. That's the level of detail that you want here. Okay, so you want to give a really quick synopsis. Somebody should be able to skim this in just a minute or two and get an idea of exactly what happened, plus your major results, plus your major conclusions. Now, one of the best ways that I found of writing an abstract, you want to do this last or just before the title, but you have to have the rest of your paper written before you do the abstract. I know it seems a little out there because it comes first in the paper, but it's going to be the last major thing that you write before your title. This is because you have to know what's going into your paper before you write this abstract. The easiest way that I found to do this, I write everything up, I got my paper, my intro, my materials and methods, my results discussion ready to go. What I do then is I then pull out the topic sentence of every single paragraph that I've written. If you think about it, a topic sentence, that's going to tell you what is in that particular paragraph, right? It's supposed to give you an overview of that paragraph if you're doing the topic sentence correctly. So if you pull out every topic sentence that you've written in your paper, that should give you a great outline. Then you're going to sort of mesh those topic sentences together, take out the extraneous stuff, and you should have a really great abstract. Okay, change it around so it flows, but then you should have a good abstract. So topic sentences into an abstract. So let's look at this abstract here. So we've learned about this external surface disinfection of lesser mealworm. Their abstract starts out with understanding the dynamics of movement of bacteria within the environment and between species is crucial to unraveling the epidemiology of bacterial species and to developing biosecurity measures to prevent dissemination. If you go into their introduction, they're going to talk a lot about movement of bacteria, about movement of bacteria in the environment between species, about epidemiology, about security measures. They're going to talk a lot about that. It's going to take 3 or 4 paragraphs in the intro. They put all that into that very first sentence. So that first sentence of your abstract should tell you, why is my paper important? Why did I bother? Why did I put my money and time into this? Who the hell cares about this? This is why. So the next sentence is going to give a little bit more detail about this, a little bit more detail about why you specifically went the way that you did. So this next sentence is, many arthropods, some beneficial and some detrimental, inhabit poultry houses. Oh, okay. So we know now from this abstract, understanding the movement of bacteria is important for biosecurity. Second, there's a lot of bugs that are in poultry houses. Check. Third, gets down to the nitty-gritty now. It says the lesser mealworm, and then the species, is a pest commonly found in poultry litter that can harbor pathogens involved in both human and animal issues. Oh, okay. So now this is why we did the lesser mealworm. It's commonly there. It can harbor pathogens. So now we know the general importance of it. We know a little bit more specific, and now we know even more specific about this particular species. Current farm management practices perpetuate persistent infestation, contributing to the dispersal of beetles and pathogens. Interesting. So now we know that the beetles are there. We also know that there are current practices that can cause things to transmit easily. Okay. Up next, to study the dissemination of the bacteria by this beetle, we require the ability to differentiate internal from external sources of bacteria carried by the beetle. Okay. So now this sums up basically their introduction. They're saying we need to be able to study this. It's important. Here's 3 sentences as to why it was important. We get a pretty good idea why it was important from this, right? Yeah. Then they say we need to be able to study, or we need to be able to tell the difference between external and internal bacteria. Up next, they're moving into the materials and methods. So in this study, Easy way to start, right? So in this study, we tested previously described methods to externally disinfect beetles and found disinfectant efficacies between 40 and 98%. Oh, that is one sentence that tells us what they did very, very briefly. They didn't go into great detail. They didn't tell us how many beetles they looked at or how long they tested or even what they tested in this case. They just said they tested some things. They found that some are effective, some are not. Great. If I want to know more information, I can go into the paper. You don't need a lot of detail in here, but that is enough to tell me if I want to read this paper or not. If I get to the point and I go, oh, they just tested a few things on the surface, I don't really want to read it, then I can move on with my life. But if I go, this is exactly what I'm looking for, now I know I can read this paper. Then the next sentence sort of sums this up a little bit more of their conclusions. The irregular surface of the insect posed a challenge to cleaning procedures because the surface offered many recesses to sequester bacteria. Complete bacterial disinfection was achieved with a serial treatment of ethanol and hydrogen peroxide or hydrogen peroxide and peracetic acid. Holy crap. So that gave me the reason that they did this paper, the specific species that they did it on, their basic materials and methods, one simple sentence, their basic results in a couple of sentences, and their overall conclusions, this is what worked. Awesome. That is a great abstract. So this is what you're striving for. If you have too many details, somebody's going to get bored and stop reading. Leave the details for the paper. This is the type of thing that when somebody says, oh, really, you're doing disinfection of lesser mealworm? Why? Oh, look, that first sentence tells you. What did you find? Oh, look, those last three sentences tell you. Perfect. Okay? So this is what you are striving for when it comes to an abstract. Your job for your paper is to write an abstract like this that makes somebody want to read the rest of your paper. Okay, go off and do it. If you have any questions, just let me know.